Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to be unpacking an incredibly chaotic story, one that takes a legendary science fiction concept and grounds it in a gritty, desperate reality. We're going to trace the frantic journey of Griffin, the Invisible Man, from the freezing streets of London to a quiet country village that is, quite frankly, about to be turned entirely upside down. It really makes you wonder, what actually happens when a brilliant scientific discovery falls into the hands of a quick-tempered criminal? Because this is definitely not your typical superhero origin story. It's a massive clash between undeniable scientific genius and a deeply volatile human flaw. Griffin has achieved the literal impossible, but, as we'll see, his temperament takes this scientific miracle and turns it into an absolute nightmare for everyone he encounters.
Let's jump right into part one. Chaos in wintry London.
Okay, so to really understand his desperation here, you have to picture this. Imagine having the ultimate power of invisibility, but the catch is, to use it, you have to be completely naked, in the middle of winter. Not exactly glamorous, right? Griffin is out there absolutely freezing on the streets of London. First, he has to run from these curious boys who are tracking his muddy footprints. Desperate for warmth, he slips into a large London store, later ends up robbing a theatrical company just to get a disguise, and finally he flees the crowded city altogether for the quiet village of Iping. Now, when Griffin slipped into that department store at closing time, he really thought he was safe. He broke open boxes, feasted on cold meat and sweets, and slept warmly on this big pile of quilts. But he made one absolutely critical error. He overslept. When the assistants arrived the next morning, he went into a total panic. To escape them, he had to frantically strip off all those warm, newly found clothes, plunging himself right back into the biting January air as a naked, invisible man. Freezing and totally desperate, he heads over to Drury Lane, which is the heart of London's theater world. He breaks into a prop shop because he urgently needs anything to hide that empty space above his shoulders. He eventually walks out as this bizarre spectacle. We're talking bandages wrapped entirely around his head, dark glasses, a false nose, and these big, bushy side whiskers. He finally has a visible form again, but getting it comes at a terrible moral cost. Because to escape that shop unseen, he doesn't just quietly sneak out the back door. He acts callously, and by callously, I mean entirely without a shred of pity or sympathy. He attacks the shopkeeper right from behind, striking him down, and robs him. This violent act funds his escape, and it really marks his full transition from a desperate, brilliant scientist to a violent criminal. Which brings us to part two, the stranger at Iping. Eager to get away from the city crowds, he catches a train and arrives in the quiet village of Iping. Now, a stranger completely covered in bandages arriving in the dead of winter, that's suspicious enough. But when the landlord's wife, Mrs. Hall, tries to just be friendly, Griffin is incredibly rude to her. Yet she kind of just brushes it off. Since he paid her in advance, she convinces herself that his unconventional, bizarre habits are simply the quirks of an eccentric scientist who is just waiting for a check in the mail. Well, that stolen money eventually runs dry, and that leads to a truly impossible crime. Early one morning, a local clergyman and his wife hear the distinct, sharp chink of money being swiped from their desk. Armed with a poker, the clergyman flings open his study door, shouting, "Surrender!" only to find the room is completely, utterly empty. There's no one hiding behind the curtains, no one up the chimney, yet the money is just gone. And that leads us right into part three, the haunted furniture. If an invisible burglary wasn't strange enough for you, things back at the inn are about to get even weirder. The landlord and his wife find Griffin's door, which is almost always locked, standing wide open. The bedclothes are cold, so he's clearly been up for a while. Then, suddenly, the room literally comes alive. Mrs. Hall hears a sniff right by her ear. A hat leaps directly off the bedpost and into her face. Then the bedroom chair springs up, charges right at her legs, physically pushes both of them out of the room, and slams and locks the door behind them. As you can probably guess, Mrs. Hall almost falls down the stairs in pure hysterics, completely losing control out of sheer terror. She just sits there moaning. She is 100% convinced that the room is haunted by spirits or that this strange, bandaged guest has used witchcraft to possess her mother's favorite chair. This takes us to part four, arresting an invisible man. So the villagers are obviously connecting the dots between the empty room burglary and the supernatural furniture incident. They secretly send for the village constable. But before he even gets there, Griffin suddenly produces ready cash, which is super suspicious since he had just claimed he was entirely broke. Mrs. Hall finally snaps. She bravely marches up and confronts him, demanding to know exactly what he did to her chair and how on earth he keeps appearing out of empty, locked rooms. The scientist, who we already know has a remarkably short fuse, just completely loses it. He becomes furious, and I mean violently, explosively angry. He shouts right back at her, "You don't understand who or what I am. Very well, I'll show you." To show them exactly what he is, Griffin suddenly starts ripping off his bandages, his dark glasses, his false nose. The whole thing takes him less than a minute. The horrified people in the bar, along with Constable Jaffers, who just walked in, suddenly find themselves staring in absolute, paralyzed shock at a man with literally no head. What happens next is just absolute chaos, a totally unbelievable final struggle. Constable Jaffers, to his credit, is a man of duty. He decides that if a warrant orders an arrest, well, he's making that arrest, with or without a head. But as Jaffers lunges to grab him, Griffin starts frantically throwing off one garment after another, becoming more and more invisible. Bystanders who try to help out are suddenly getting hit by brutal, rapid blows that seem to come from nowhere at all. In a last, desperate attempt to hold on, Jaffers is knocked completely unconscious, and Griffin shakes himself free, vanishing into thin air.
So let's take a step back for part 5, assessing the eccentric scientist.
When the dust finally settles, we really have to look at who this guy is. On one hand, we absolutely cannot deny his scientific brilliance. I mean, figuring out how to make the human body invisible, that is a miracle of physics and biology. Yet this monumental discovery is completely corrupted by his terrible temperament. He doesn't use his genius to help people or advance humanity. He uses it to strike people from behind, rob innocent shopkeepers, and terrorize a whole community. Which leaves us with a final, really provocative question. How do you assess Griffin as a scientist? Does a groundbreaking, impossible discovery make someone great if they completely lack the morality to wield it properly? Or does his descent into chaotic, selfish criminality overshadow his genius entirely? It's an incredible sci-fi adventure for sure, but more importantly, it's a chilling reminder of what happens when ultimate power meets unchecked human anger. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today. Until next time, keep questioning what you might do if nobody could see you.